Destiny addicts, want some IRL exotics for your setup? SteelSeries have delivered a range of Lightfall peripherals and they are awesome. I'm rocking them right now on my setup. If you want to grab them, you can get 12% off using offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Click below to check it out right now or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Lightfall? More like light fail, am I right, guys? No, I'm not remotely correct, but you'd be forgiven for thinking that if you've seen any of the top-line discourse surrounding Destiny 2's latest expansion, where the Witch Queen saw near universal acclaim and the warmest critical reception of any Destiny 2 expansion content. Lightfall's reception has been a few shades cooler, like ice-cold, stasis-level cool. At the time of writing, Lightfall sits at a mostly negative 33% on Steam, a number not seen since the Curse of Osiris DLC long ago, a DLC widely considered to be Destiny's worst ever update. The critics' side of things is better, but still nothing to write home about. Lightfall is scoring plenty of 7s and maybe some 8s. IGN issued a review in progress where they scored the expansion a 5, and given the size and reach of IGN, that number certainly did the rounds and helped shape a narrative that Lightfall kinda sucks. It's a sentiment that was more than echoed on social media. Various subreddits were amplifying articles critical of the expansion, and the Destiny 2 subreddit itself was a raging inferno for the first 72 hours after the game launched. Even Destiny 2 content creators jumped in, many of them voicing their disappointment with Lightfall. Wherever you looked, user scores, critics, social media, content creators, the message was clear. Lightfall fucking sucks. So, why did everyone hate Lightfall so much? Why did it suck? Well, a lot of it can be put down to a campaign storyline that is arguably the single most disappointing storyline we've seen in Destiny to this point. It's not only bad in its own right, it's especially bad when set against the last 2 years, where Bungie appeared to have found their storytelling groove and were delivering fantastic expansion and seasonal content storylines. It's also especially bad given where Lightfall sits in the Destiny timeline. This is the penultimate expansion of the Light vs. Dark saga. This was meant to be the expansion that sets up for the final climactic battle to end all battles. Suffice it to say, it did not do that, and people are now gravely concerned about Bungie's ability to land this thing with only one expansion to go. When the initial shock of that narrative failure wore off, players began to turn their attention to everything else that Lightfall has to offer, and it's at that point that sentiment started to shift. It's a more positive sentiment now, but only for those that stuck with the game or who might be willing to pay attention to it past the first few days of Lightfall's launch. For potential or lapsed players, or for those for whom Destiny holds no appeal at all, that launch window, that 5 out of 10 sentiment is essentially set in stone now. More proof that Destiny sucks, that Bungie can't be trusted, and that the only people who play this game are hopelessly enthralled to it and will eat whatever shit Bungie serves us and will thank them for it no matter how bad it is. That is a bummer, because the truth is, this is a pretty good expansion by some metrics. Certainly not all, but some. And on balance, the virtues of Lightfall outweigh its shortcomings. The campaign missions offered up a variety of really interesting set pieces and challenges, many of which will be remembered. The Strand subclass is a true high point for the franchise, offering an entirely new way to play, totally fresh versus every other subclass, and just insanely fun in a variety of contexts. The post-campaign content is a little grindy, but it also offers up some of the most rewarding mission experiences, narrative, and loot you can find in Lightfall, and it's a shame that so much of this isn't incorporated into the main campaign experience. The sandbox changes are a mixed bag, but quality of life improvements like loadouts and changes to the crafting system are really welcome, and on the whole, Destiny feels more flexible and less grindy than it did just a few short weeks ago. Still, Lightfall is defined as much by what it doesn't offer as what it does. PvP remains untouched, no new maps. Gambit, untouched, no new maps. Seasonal model, untouched and is still in need of renovation. The promised in-game looking for group system has been delayed, and there's a real absence of truly new weapons that aren't just reskins of prior weapons with new perks. Yes, many of the issues we have with what Lightfall does or doesn't do will be addressed over the coming year as part of general updates or as seasonal content drops, and I think everyone already playing Destiny is kind of okay with that. But I know that for me personally, with so many eyes on this expansion, I'm disappointed that Lightfall didn't deliver an experience that might help new or lapsed players see Destiny the way that I see Destiny. Expansions are the moment when so many give Destiny a first look or a second chance, and while there's so much here to appreciate, so much of it is undermined by silly missteps, omissions, and own goals. Let me put it this way, I think Destiny is a better game than Lightfall shows it to be. Given how much momentum Destiny has gained over the past few years, Lightfall feels like a sudden stop that brings us back to the unevenness of the franchise's past. A past I think we had all hoped we had left behind long ago.
Guardian, help Osiris breach the veil before Callus does.
I have no purpose.
Destiny storytelling has come a long, long way. Even those who have never played a single second of Destiny will be familiar with the "I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain" thing that epitomized Destiny's half-baked, haphazard approach to storytelling. Back then, Bungie's problems with story emerged as an artifact of their lumpy and meandering development process. Destiny 1 famously languished in pre-production for a long time, receiving multiple story reboots, including one much later in the production schedule. The story we eventually got was the one that could be cobbled together based on the aspects of the game that had already been built, and it wasn't much of a story. Certainly one of the reasons why Destiny met such a tepid critical reception at launch was because of its narrative failings, a huge step down from Bungie's previous offerings with Halo. Post-vanilla launch, Bungie maintained its lightweight, hands-off approach to narrative throughout the entire life of Destiny 1. Its expansions, The Taken King and Rise of Iron, did deliver story and characters you could sink your teeth into, but the various DLC offerings and updates did little to expand on these. During this time, Destiny's story lived mostly in the Grimoire cards, lore entries which were famously not in the actual video game and had to be accessed on Bungie's website. Still, there was a lot in those cards, and in the Books of Sorrow, and in the environment design, and the enemies, and the names of our weapons, and so much more. Destiny was a world pregnant with history and lore. Bungie just had no idea what to do with any of it. The release of Destiny 2 saw a marked shift in the tone of the franchise. Let's call it the MCUification of Destiny. The Red War storyline was very straightforward and very easy to understand. There were quirky side characters who relentlessly cracked jokes and still do on certain strikes. Please delete failsafe from the game. Thank you very much, Bungie. Clearly, Bungie were responding to the criticism that Destiny's approach to narrative was too dark and too circumspect, and so the pendulum swung hard in the other direction. Too far, in fact, and it would only see a correction in Forsaken, when Destiny seemed to find a tonal equilibrium with the death of its titular main character, Cayde 6, an event so seminal in the Destiny timeline that Lightfall, this very expansion, 4 years later, saw a monument to Cayde 6 erected in the tower. I don't know why they did that. It's weird, to be honest. I feel like we all should have moved on by now. Anyway, even post-Forsaken, there was still a sense that Destiny's storytelling was either feast or famine, that we get these big expansions that would lurch the story forward, and then we get basically nothing while we await the next expansion to drop. At the same time, there were also these lingering questions about what is all this building toward? Who was the Exo Stranger? What was the Traveler? What was the Darkness? And why were the two of them beefing? It's nice to imagine that Bungie had some grand narrative in mind when they set about making Destiny, but as I mentioned earlier, that just wasn't the case. Destiny's former game director Luke Smith said as much as well. Speaking to PC Gamer in 2017 on the topic of the Exo Stranger, he said, quote, "The Exo Stranger is one that always makes me chuckle a little bit, because I feel that's one character where we actually wrapped up the arc. She gave you a sweet gun and then dissolved, presumably off to do something else. So I feel like of all our characters we've introduced and exited, we actually exited her effectively," end quote. God, if Bungie feels that's an effective exit, then I would hate to see an ineffective one. His musings on the Darkness are even more revealing. In 2017, Jason Schreier, then writing for Kotaku, asked Luke Smith, quote, "Tell me the truth, is it because none of you have any idea what the Darkness actually means?" End quote. Smith responds, quote, "So, I think at that point, just totally candidly, we had no idea what it was. Straight up, we had no clue. We didn't know what it was, and we, for a period, we chose that we were going to lump all the races in together, and you see this in tooltips in the game, Minions of the Darkness. And we had taken all the races and said, they'll just be the Darkness. But that's not what the IP deserves. It's like literally not. And so what we're doing with Destiny 2 is we're deliberately telling a story about the light and what it means to be chosen. And as such, we're in the process of removing the term darkness from the game," end quote. These were rough sentiments for the Destiny community to hear because it ultimately invalidated a lot of the world building and lore that people had become invested in to that point. People felt hoodwinked by this, as though Bungie had strung them along all these years, only to reveal that it was all just smoke and mirrors. So to be clear, we're at a point now where Bungie feels like the Exo Stranger storyline is wrapped up, and the Darkness is not a focus of the game going forward. And I think that's such a critical moment to keep in mind, because the last few years, with the Shadowkeep expansion and beyond, Bungie pivoted back to this stuff, reintroducing the Darkness as a central force in the universe and centering the entire Beyond Light expansion on the Exo Stranger, revealed to be Elsie Bray. The Witch Queen would take this further with the introduction of the Witness, the embodiment of the Darkness, in the same way the Traveler embodies the light. For the last few years, Bungie have positioned these expansions as a continuation of a saga stretching all the way back to 2014. And it is, but I think it's important to remember that we only got there because fans kind of dragged Bungie to it. where Bungie were ready to let so many of these mysteries go unanswered. The result has been spectacularly successful for the franchise. The old meme that Destiny has no story has just been straight up incorrect for years now, as Bungie have delivered a compelling A-plot in the form of the Darkness and the Pyramids and Savathun and the Witness, as well as worthy B-plots through seasonal content. Those B-plot lines were often related to the main story in some way, but they were often a chance to build out an ensemble cast larger than just the Vanguard. The Drifter, Keitel, Eramis, Anna, Archie, who's a good boy. If you're a Destiny story enjoyer, you were eating good for the past 2 years, and you were very excited for Lightfall because the Witness had arrived. He was here. He was about to do his thing and throw down, and we knew it was going to be both big and bad. We knew that we were going to lose this round because that's what happens in penultimate chapters. Shit goes really bad so that the heroes can hit their absolute bottom and be tested and rise from the ashes and claim victory in a thrilling conclusion. So did we lose in Lightfall? I think so, but I'm not sure about that, and if we did, no one seems to be that bothered about it.
The Traveler is gone, but we're still here. It may seem small, but it's no less important under the circumstances.
Lightfall begins the way a penultimate chapter should. Lots of fighting and stuff going to shit. Ships are being blown up, Amanda Holiday is getting shot down, the Vanguard, they're sort of standing around looking concerned. Ghosts are getting run through those egg slicer things. It's all very dramatic, and in the midst of it, we join the fray to scuttle a Cabal ship which is leading the charge. We're successful, and as we make our escape in a Cabal drop pod, Osiris serves up one of the best lines of the entire campaign.
Are those things safe?
Can't be that.
One crash landing later, we arrive on Neomuna, the other last city, I guess. I think we need to rename ours now, unless we're going for the whole Final Fantasy nomenclature. Neomuna is a hidden city on the planet Neptune, an entire civilization that splintered from Earth some time ago, and we're apparently way better at the whole technology thing, since they've got some super cool shit down there. The pinnacle of their technology may well be the Cloud Striders, fully modded defenders of Neomuna who are taller than us, hotter than us, and they ride around on surfboards. Damn it, Bungie, we're supposed to be the heroes of this story. Now we feel like schlubs. During the cutscenes, I feel like Tom Holland standing next to Zendaya. Someone get me a crate to stand on. No time to focus on that though, because we've got bigger things to worry about. Namely the fact that the Witness is after something called the Veil. And while I don't know what that is right now, I am confident that it is going to be explained to me at some point during this campaign. So for now, I'll just go along with the plan of making sure the Witness doesn't get the Veil, whatever that is. Cyrus is leading us in our search for the Veil, but guiding us through Neomuna are the Cloud Striders, the elder Rohan and his protege Nimbus. Rohan is grey-haired, wizened, battle-hardened, brow weighed down with the weight of his responsibility to those around him and the stakes that loom so large above him. If you were to cast him in a movie, Idris Elba would play him and it would rule. Nimbus is the exact opposite of all those things, and very annoying, and makes really bad jokes and cannot read the room ever. Like when their mentor dies and 5 minutes later, Nimbus is like, haha, it's not like he's around to disagree. Or like after we just kill Keitel's father and Nimbus is all like,
well, the uglier they are, the harder they fall, right? No? Come on.
Can I just say it was kind of insensitive for our Guardian to do that fist bump, but anyway, look, a lot has been said about Nimbus and how awkwardly their character fits into this chapter of the story. At a time when the world is about to end, Nimbus is cracking jokes and dishing out one-liners that can ultimately be boiled down to "surf's up, dude," and it just doesn't sit right versus our expectations of what this chapter of this story is meant to feel like. This was meant to be a dire series of events setting up for the final battle next year. We were meant to feel the weight of the Witness pressing down on our chests so hard that we could barely breathe. Instead, Bungie are trying to make us breathless with laughter, courtesy of Nimbus's jokes, and yeah, no one's laughing. It's not entirely Nimbus's fault though, as Bungie have said that they wanted this campaign to feel like an 80s action movie. That's why it has this whole training montage in there at one point, as well as that time trial mission and the Sparrow escape and the epic showdown outside of Callisto's ship. There's a lot that goes into pursuing that tone. I think it would have been a fantastic tone to pursue for a seasonal storyline, maybe, but I think it's absolutely the wrong tone to pursue here, in this moment, 8 years into a saga, when the stakes have not only never been higher, but also have never been more visible, more manifest than they are right now. We can punch the Witness right in his stupid, smoky head if we want to, so why aren't we doing that? Nobody knows, and it's a question that is never answered at any point during the Lightfall campaign. You know what we are doing, though? Do you know what we're doing? Because I finished the campaign and I didn't know what we were doing the whole time. Every single mission, every single exchange is laser focused on the Veil, the Veil, the Veil. It's all anyone can talk about, but there's just one problem. Everybody knows what the Veil is, except me, the hero of the goddamn story. At no point is this thing ever explained, and yet every character in the entire Lightfall campaign is obsessed with it. It's genuinely stunning to see the degree to which Bungie bungled this core aspect of the campaign's narrative. They send players on what feels like a wild goose chase because we have absolutely no idea what we are chasing, and therefore no idea why we should care about it. I know a lot of people will say it's explained in a throwaway line in the post-game Blue Jay quest, or they say, oh, it's supposed to be a mystery. No, I'm sorry. The reason Savathun got the light was a mystery, one that was resolved well at the end of the Witch Queen campaign. Then there's this conclusion, where even though we won the fight, apparently we lost somehow, and the witness ended up getting the Travelussi he'd been chasing this entire time. At this point, the Traveler is apparently gone, even though we can still see it on the star map. You chat with Zavala and Ikora, and they're like, oh, the Traveler's gone. That's pretty sad, isn't it? Anyway, life goes on. It's like, excuse me? What? The Traveler has got... Why aren't you freaking the fuck out right now? None of this makes any sense. It's just a total mess, and it's such inept storytelling from Bungie at a time when the narrative team have been delivering nothing but bangers for like 2 years straight, and it really begs the question, what the fuck happened? I'm really reluctant to put all of this on the shoulders of the narrative team alone. Now, this is totally a guess, but I think it's more likely that, much like Destiny 1, they kind of had to build a story around what they could. It's no secret that Bungie added an additional expansion to their timeline at one point because they claimed they needed an extra expansion to properly conclude this saga. It's very clear now that this was not due to a need to tell a larger, more ambitious story. There is almost no advancement of the A plotline here in Lightfall. That is why you can string together the opening cinematic and the closing cinematic, and it just feels like one uninterrupted sequence of events where no time has passed at all. Far more likely is that COVID affected Bungie's development timeline, pushing out their plans and forcing them to move things around, forcing the narrative team to come up with whatever they could. There's a theory during the rounds that Strand was meant to ship with the Witch Queen, and I mean, you can see it. The green motif of that expansion, the whole paracausal energy thing, Osteostriga being the headline weapon, thematically, Strand belongs in the Witch Queen expansion. And combined with how threadbare Lightfall's narrative is, it definitely lends credence to the idea that Lightfall is a filler expansion of sorts. So if Lightfall's story isn't focused on the threat of the Witness, what is it focused on? Well, Lightfall's campaign is probably best characterized as a protracted tutorial for the new Strand subclass. It's somewhat unclear how all of this starts, and it's very awkwardly explained with some mangled river analogy. The long and the short of it is that Strand is a new darkness subclass that we discover for ourselves rather than having it gifted to us. It doesn't really make sense then why some enemies have Strand shields, but I guess that's neither here nor there. The campaign missions are ostensibly about stopping Callus and the Witness from getting the Veil. The missions are actually about harnessing the power of Strand. It's a frustrating tutorial, to be honest. You might imagine that the first 1 or 2 missions would allow us to dip our toes into the water before diving in with both feet soon after that. Not so much. Campaign drip feeds you little tastes of Strand for brief moments before quickly yanking it away. The clan I play with, we called it a tummy ache, where one moment you're suspending targets in the air and grappling across the map, and all of a sudden, whoop, tummy ache, back to your old subclass we go. Sometimes you'll get Strand for as little as 1 or 2 rooms before you suddenly lose it again. As I said, it's annoying because you just want to play around with this new toy, but Bungie won't let you do that until you've eaten all of your vegetables. Luckily, the missions themselves that Bungie have delivered during the campaign range from good to absolutely excellent. It's some of the best mission design the franchise has ever seen. I played through the campaign solo on legendary difficulty. It was fucking hard, way harder than the Witch Queen in my humble opinion, but it was good, particularly missions like Downfall, Headlong, and the final showdown with Callus. 3 missions that really pushed me to play well in a way that felt unfair at first, but it was just a matter of having to get good, which is always a sign of good game design. It was during the campaign that we got to meet the Tormentors, and they may well be the best new enemy type ever added to the game. I was kind of underwhelmed by the light-bearing hive. They weren't anywhere near as scary as Bungie hyped them up to be, but Tormentors, when they are on the field, you cannot but respect them. Their size, their suite of abilities, their movement options, their range, their ability to suppress you or just completely shut down your super. These are the very first non-boss foes we've ever encountered who can truly match our power without having to rely on mountainous HP or cheap one-shots. This is a brilliant enemy type, and I can't wait to go up against more of them in future content. It's a shame that Lightfall's story falls so flat, because had its narrative been focused on the matter at hand, had it starred the heroes we were already well acquainted with rather than introducing Johnny-come-latelys, and had it answered questions instead of raising new ones, I genuinely believe that this would have gone down as the greatest campaign in Destiny history. There's so much great stuff here, but no matter how good it is, it doesn't distract from the feeling that Lightfall is like a side quest that we're being forced to do before we can fight the main boss, and after 8 years of being strung along, most of us are well and truly out of patience. But Lightfall's campaign is getting kind of shit on left, right, and center. One thing we can all agree on is that Strand absolutely rules. Strand is the second of the darkness subclasses, and thematically it's quite interesting. It introduces us to the idea that the darkness is the realm beyond the physical. Light comes from what you can see and touch, but darkness comes from what you might feel or imagine or dream or fear. That's the origin of this power. It comes from our deepening connection to the darkness, and it isn't bestowed upon us by a pyramid. We find it for ourselves. We are the first to harness this power in this way, even if variations of it have been noted by others before us. Strand is a subversion of our expectations. We all expected what came next to be a poison class or a toxic class. We'd seen stuff like Thorn and that annoying shit that wizards cast on us, and we'd seen hints and leaks about a potential green subclass, and we all thought, well, that's it then, the poison class is on the way. What we got was so much cooler. This class that harnessed paracausal energy to suspend foes, manifest bombs out of thin air, and zip ourselves across the map in an instant. There's an old adage that there's no video game that can't be improved with a grapple, and Strand offers lots of proof in the affirmative. Personally, I actually have quite a few issues with the light subclasses 3.0. For most of them, I think they lack identity. There are some exceptions, of course. Void Hunter is a good one, since it's very based around invisibility and the utility that that can bring. But most of the others, especially on Titan, which is my main, are just different but very similar ways to deal damage with a grenade that's probably too effective on too short a cooldown, powered melee, and leveraging a weapon perk that makes enemies explode. I'm being reductive, but that's the broad strokes. Stasis, on the other hand, is brilliant. Stasis is about reshaping the battlefield on a whim to provide cover for ourselves, block off enemy paths, create new platforms we can jump on, slow or freeze enemies altogether. You can pretty much play Void and Arc Titan the exact same way, but Stasis enables and requires an entirely new gameplay approach, and that is awesome. Strand achieves the same objective, but in a totally different way. Strand is an all-new pattern of play focused on rapid repositioning and relentless aggression, supported by not only a grapple, but also a buff called Woven Mail, which provides an absolutely absurd amount of damage resistance, giving you the confidence to get up close and personal with your foes. This is what we didn't quite understand when we first got our hands on Strand. I saw plenty of Reddit threads and tweets being like, well, we can't use Strand at endgame because we can't get close to targets. Yes, you fucking can. You could probably survive War Priest Stomp if you had Woven Mail up. Probably not, but I reckon you'd be close. That is, funnily enough, the secret sauce that makes this subclass what it is. Grappling into a foe is really fun, sure, but you wouldn't be able to do it nearly as much if you didn't have Woven Mail to cover your ass. Strand is not just grapple go brr, it's an endgame viable subclass that allows you to play up close, and that is a great addition to the gameplay loop. But yeah, the grapple is also hella fun, no doubt about that. The base cooldown on it can feel a little long, but there are ways to bring it down substantially. In terms of that cooldown, I feel like we're never going to be truly happy with it. When you can swing like Spider-Man, anytime you're not swinging like Spider-Man is going to feel like a downgrade. But there's obviously a need to not get too carried away with that cooldown and turn Destiny into that pizza delivery minigame from Spider-Man 2. Though to be fair, if that was added as a patrol type, I don't think anyone will complain. My one complaint with Strand is one that I know many people will not agree with, but it's in relation to crowd control. So I just spent a solid paragraph talking up Stasis and how awesome it is. Stasis is a lot less awesome now that Strand has come along, because the best utility of Stasis was its ability to slow or freeze targets. But when you did that, you had trade-offs, because damage would break the freeze. With Strand though, when you string up a target, you can just wail on them for as long as those strings will hold, and there is nothing your foe can do about it. PvE enemies cannot attack or defend in any way, they just sit there getting reamed. And you have so many ways to keep a target permanently suspended on Titan, barricade on a super short cooldown, a grenade, shooting the little strand orb things that appear, which procs a seasonal mod, your super. It's crazy. I personally think that the ability to permanently lock down any foe we like for as long as we like with no trade-offs is too much on its own, but it also greatly reduces the value proposition of stasis. Still, that's a minor complaint that can be easily addressed with some buffs to stasis or some nerfs to Strand. The bottom line though is that when it comes to Strand, I log on to Destiny so excited to play around with it. Destiny has always been famed for how good it feels to play. I think Subclass 3.0 made us more powerful, but I don't think it made Destiny feel any better to play. I think Stasis did, albeit in a more subtle way, and Strand definitely does, in a way that is immediately noticeable and I'd say transformative. Like if you're someone that's played Destiny before but didn't like it, I don't think that Subclass 3.0 would have lured you back. But Strand is so different to anything else that the game offers that I think it's its own unique value proposition. Lightfall doesn't offer a lot to potential or lapsed players, but if there's one thing that's going to make a Destiny fan out of a Destiny retiree or even a Destiny hater, it's probably going to be Strand. That's how good it is. Lightfall is set primarily on Neomuna, a neon synthwave-inspired location that purports to be purpose-built for Strand. What does that mean? It means they put like 3 grapple points in the air, that's about it. I exaggerate, but not by much. When I had heard that this new location was aiming to really highlight the uniqueness of the new subclass, I imagined fun shortcuts that were only accessible with Strand, new patrol types and public events that would leverage our new abilities, etc. It's definitely not like that. There are certain sections of the map that are only accessible via the grapple, but they're more mission-specific sections. I think the most notable difference between Neomuna and other locations is that there's a lot more enemies perched up high, on balconies, on rooftops, on floating platforms. This does invite you to grapple up to them to KO them, but you can also just shoot them from the ground, that works too. In this specific aspect, the fusion between Neomuna and the Strand subclass, it does feel like a missed opportunity. They could basically 10x the number of grapple points available throughout Neomuna, and it would immediately make the location better without breaking anything. So yeah, I think Bungie should think about that. In terms of the space itself, it definitely feels smaller than Europa and way smaller than the Throne World, but it does feel more densely packed and more demanding. The Throne World was famously vacant whenever you stepped into it. You'd transmat in and ride around for like 6 minutes before spotting your first enemy. Neomuna's main landing area is a ghost town, but the rest of the map, you don't have to go too far to find enemies, and when you kill them, some new ones will rock up pretty soon after that. On the whole, I would say that Neomuna is unremarkable if you're just looking at its topography, but it's a definite shift in the design philosophy underpinning what patrol spaces should be and what function they serve within the Destiny experience. So how? Well, firstly, they're a lot harder. A lot of that is owed to the difficulty rebalancing, which we'll talk about later, but even beyond that, Bungie has made the conscious decision to make Neomuna feel like a step up versus other locations, and it absolutely is. I love it. I love the fact that stuff can kill me on patrol now, except for those fucking threshers, but everything else I love. I know there are some complaints about the balancing of legendary weapons, that they feel too ineffective now. I just personally don't agree with that. I'm using my weapons again, and I need to shoot them more than once to kill stuff. It's awesome in my view, but we'll talk more about that later in the Sandbox and Systems section. Secondly, Neomuna hosts probably the best ever rendition of the mass match-made public activity that we've seen to this point. Previously, stuff like Escalation Protocol, Blind Well, or Containment have all been good in some ways, but they've had their drawbacks like a lack of matchmaking, or repetitiveness, or the fact that they were all set in the same location. Terminal Override solves all of these problems at once. It happens in a different location every day. That brings in new types of enemies each day. You can matchmake to it using the map icon. It's full of lots of enemies to kill and it's fun to do. Plus, it drops excellent loot that you cannot craft, encouraging you to actually farm it. It gives you something to do whenever you're not doing anything else. I'm sure we're going to get different variations on the public event formula in the future, but the elements of this equation, this all needs to stay, whatever Bungie plans to do. By the way, have you found that randomly occurring public event that awards you an exotic if you complete it? If not, stick around on Neomuna for a while and wait till it rocks up. You will not be disappointed. What about Lost Sectors? Did you know that there's a literal video games arcade in Lightfall? If you played the game, you'd absolutely know that. But if you haven't, there is a video games arcade in Lightfall, and it is awesome. Last boss kind of sucks though, not gonna lie. But a cool setting isn't all these Neomuna Lost Sectors serves up. Each of them have their own narrative associated with them, giving you a reason to visit, and they have radio chatter peppered throughout. Lost sectors are bigger and they have more enemies. The way lost sectors are paced now makes them feel like mini strikes, complete with boss encounters that are a genuine step up over any of the lost sector bosses we've seen to this point. This ambitious design is fantastic, but it's also diametrically opposed to the current lost sector loot grind that is the only means of getting new seasonal exotic armor. Bungie can't have it both ways, and I for one hope they give us more ways to earn exotics, because the current exotic system sucks anyway and it's due for some serious overhaul. The final thing I think we need to recognize about Neomuna is how tight its overall reward and activity economy is. Nimbus will hand out bounties as per normal, but they'll also hand out a weekly bounty giving you access to a weekly pinnacle quest. Their reputation levels offer meaningful rewards like new landing zones throughout the region, new armor to transmog, red border weapons, and at level 30, every reward they offer becomes a weapon, which is obviously what we're chasing more often than not. The result is that Neomuna feels like a rewarding place to spend time in, whether it's grinding terminal overload for unique weapons, public events for exotics, weekly bounties for access to pinnacles, or just general reputation for red border weapons. Neomuna is always there and it's always worth your time. There's an argument that major systems overhauls and sandbox changes shouldn't be evaluated in the context of an expansion because they are free in inverted commas. I get that. I think it's sort of true. Maybe I might have agreed with that at some point, but I don't agree with it now. I think the sandbox and system changes that we get for free aren't actually free, since Bungie's ongoing support and updating of this game is predicated on the sale of expansions like Lightfall. There is no version of this game that continues to exist without the sale of major expansions, and if it does exist as a totally free-to-play product, then God help us, because I'm sure that version of Destiny would absolutely fucking suck. So I view major sandbox overhauls like difficulty rebalancing and strike updates as part of Lightfall, just as I view things like the mod system changes, loadouts, guardian ranks, and the god-awful commendation system as part of Lightfall. So with all that established, let's talk about those things. In my review of The Witch Queen, I said that there was a problem at the very core of Destiny's gameplay loop, and it's that the baseline difficulty of the game was brain-dead easy mode. Patrols, strikes, seasonal activities, if you were playing any of these on the default difficulty, then enemies would just fall over as soon as you so much as glanced in their direction, and you're essentially invulnerable owing to the recently buffed resilience stat and subclass 3.0, which gave you millions of ways to soak or heal damage. My main concern with the difficulty model back then was that it greatly reduced the importance of gunplay in a franchise that is famed for its industry-leading gunplay. I did not have the same relationship to my weaponry that I once did because enemies would just die before I even had the chance to shoot them. In the lead up to Lightfall, Bungie began seeding the idea that the game would get harder. They stressed that it was not about making it difficult to the point where it would push out less skilled players, but rather it was about rebalancing the game's baseline difficulty to reflect the power creep that had occurred in the many years since we were all running double primaries and our grenade was on a 4-minute cooldown. I don't think anyone can argue that that is a good objective to have. I think everyone agrees that strikes, patrols, etc. were not keeping pace with our current power, and trying to re-baseline that is a good idea. What people don't agree on is how successful Bungie's interventions on this front have been. The long and the short of it is that Bungie have made it so that almost all content we run now will be a few power levels above whatever we are, guaranteeing at least some challenge no matter what. There's definitely a group of people, the majority maybe, who feel like Bungie's gone too far with this change, and the content now feels overly bullet spongy, particularly if you're shooting with a legendary weapon as opposed to an exotic. I just don't agree with that personally. I have not enjoyed shooting my guns in Destiny this much for a long time. Typically, when I had to dump this many rounds into a target, it was in Master or Grandmaster level content, which came with its own suite of bullshit one-shots, and I felt like I was made of glass. Now, in strikes, on patrols, in seasonal activities, I shoot stuff, I have to shoot it some more, and while all this is happening, I can soak up a reasonable amount of damage. I feel like I'm on the field, attacking with intent, contending with enemies who provide the right amount of pushback, and I'm using my guns. I know that puts me at odds with the majority consensus on this issue, but for real, one of my favorite things, perhaps my favorite thing about Lightfall, is that I think the game feels better to play in almost all activities. Yes, I agree, legendary lost sectors are problematic, but only in the context of their reward economy, which sort of incentivizes lightning fast speedruns since you're farming for exotic drops by doing the same activity over and over again. Terrible, terrible delivery model for exotics, by the way. If you got rid of that system and provided a different reward support for lost sectors that didn't incentivize us to run them the way we currently do, I suspect a lot of the complaints about difficulty balancing would vanish. So personally, I think Bungie have done really well with this difficulty change, but I know many people do not agree. Beyond this, Lightfall brings a number of new game systems and systems overhauls that might be called quality of life changes. The first, and objectively the most awesome, is the loadout system. We've been asking for something like this for 8 years, and now we can finally switch between loadouts in a press of a button. Obviously, that on its own is just fantastic, and immediately opens up the game massively, giving us the confidence and convenience to switch between different playstyles where before, the manual effort required to do so and do it properly meant that you often just couldn't be asked. But I think we also need to recognize just how good a job Bungie have done with this system from a user experience perspective. It looks so clean, it is so easy to use, so intuitive, so snappy and responsive. There was a potential version of this that was shitty and convoluted and half-baked, like the commendation system, but the loadout system is one of the biggest, straight-up, uncomplicated Bungie W's that Lightfall delivers. In conjunction with this is a massive streamlining of the mod system. Warmind cells are gone, elemental wells gone, all of the interesting mods which made for unique builds gone. What's left? Some stat buffs, I guess? If you want to get your abilities back faster and do more damage with a certain weapon type, then you can certainly do that. But if you are hoping for anything more interesting than that, then you better settle in for some waiting. That's the thing. This is simpler. This is cleaner. It is easier to understand and interface with. The mod system was unwieldy and intimidating, and even with the support of a loadout system, it still would have been difficult for most people to properly pass this system, to be able to hold all of it in their heads at once and think about the components rather than just copy a build from Dado or whoever. This system has been cleaned up, but it's also been hollowed out. And hopefully Bungie will introduce new, more interesting mods in the future updates, because the ones we have now are very, very vanilla. What's next? Guardian ranks. Okay, so for a long time now, Destiny has had a big problem with the new player onboarding experience. There is a new light campaign now, which will set you up at the most basic of basics, but after that, you're dumped onto the star map, you're given a quick pat on the backside, and you are on your own, completely disoriented and confused, and fuck this, I'm uninstalling. Bungie never promised that the new Guardian rank system would solve these problems, but they did say it would help, and I guess it kinda does. The first 6 ranks do send you to all of the NPCs you need to meet. It asks you to mod some gear, masterwork some stuff, get some playlist ranks, etc. It's not much, but it's something, and you have to guess that this will keep at least a few people more engaged than before. Still, it's no substitute for a proper early game experience that introduces people to the Destiny universe, something that is all but impossible to provide in this era of vaulted content and seasonal storylines. Guardian ranks weren't just pointed at newcomers though, they were also intended to motivate existing players. Rather than just have a completely meaningless season pass number above your head, we'd instead have a totally meaningless Guardian rank above our head. Have you stunned 5 barrier champions? Congratulations, you are now a veteran. In theory, the idea of a ranking system that would bestow a title on us and allow us to quickly communicate our legend to others is a good idea. But this system really isn't that. It's sort of an extension of the seasonal challenges, except this one doesn't award XP or Bright Dust, and whatever rank we do achieve resets at the end of the season. I feel like I'd be more motivated by this system if we got to keep the rank permanently. Like if a new light saw me with a few thousand hours in the game standing next to a blueberry with 50 hours in the game and 6 exotics to his name, we'd both appear as rank 6 veterans. Does that sound right? If I hit max rank 12 and he didn't put another minute into the game after that, we'd still both be level 6 at the start of the next season. Does that sound right? I think there's a different version of Guardian ranks that's based on your legend, not on your seasonal exploits, but I understand that there's a lot of potential overlap there with Triumph Score and Seals. I don't really know the solution, to be honest. I just know that Guardian ranks is going to need a lot more refinement before it feels right. You know what would immediately improve the Guardian rank system? Disconnecting it from the awful commendation system. Man, I really can't believe how much Bungie have stuffed this one up. So I firmly believe that any sort of in-game commendation system should never be connected to any sort of in-game reward, be it cosmetic or otherwise. The goal of a commendation system is to highlight people who contribute positively to group play, so that these people become recognizable and desirable in looking for group scenarios. The minute you start linking this to rewards and Guardian ranks, it all breaks down, and you get a situation where people are sitting in Wellspring shooting rockets at their feet so they can farm commendations, so they can progress their Guardian ranks. Ridiculous. That is setting aside the absolutely absurd number of commendations needed to progress through the ranks. Everyone that I know who has hit rank 7 already got there because they spent at least a few hours shooting rockets at their feet in Wellspring, for real. And apparently to hit max rank, you need 6,000 commendation score. I'm already level 50 on the season pass. I have played around 100 hours of this expansion to this point. I am commendation rank like 600. Fuck off. Then there's the more basic user experience elements, like the fact that you don't get pushed to the commendation screen immediately after you finish an activity, so most people just forget and then you get pissed off that no one commended you. Then there's the fact that the reward screen and the commendation screen are on separate pages, so you need to click back and forth to compare names if you seriously want to look at who's done well and commend them for it. Then there's the fact that there's like 13 different commendation types when most of them have 2 or more that mean the same thing, like thoughtful, patient and considerate, and level-headed. Like, what? Like, none of these actually mean anything in the context of how we talk about Destiny either. They're just fluff words that mean nothing. And finally, there's the fact that the commendation screen bugs out half the time, so you couldn't even award or receive commendations if you wanted to. Where the loadout feature is this slam dunk 9 out of 10 user experience, the commendation system is like a 1 out of 10 at best. And in terms of its impact on the game, it adds no value whatsoever, and in fact, it actually makes the game worse. You have people killing themselves in Wellspring to farm this because you need it to progress Guardian ranks. More importantly, I get legitimately pissed off when I finish an activity and people don't commend me because I've done well, I've contributed, but then they just forgot or they couldn't be bothered or they're already gone to orbit or whatever. And I'm looking at my Guardian rank and I want it to go up and it's just not happening. This system needs to be completely overhauled before the arrival of the Looking for Group tool, but in the meantime, I hope they just remove the commendation requirements from Guardian ranks because that shit is crazy. On the topic of the in-game Looking for Group tool, that's one of the big absences that is disappointing about Lightfall. Another thing we've been asking for 8 years is matchmaking for higher level activities, since we're basically doing that anyway using stuff like Discord, or before that Destiny LFG. With Bungie making it clear that matchmaking is essentially off the table for harder difficulties, an LFG tool was going to be the next best thing, and it was announced as a Lightfall feature. Hooray! If properly implemented, this could be a real game changer for the franchise, making it vastly easier for more casual players to finally enter higher level content and raids, since many of them just don't know how to use group finder tools external to the game. The delay of this feature to later in the year is understandable, but when you know that it could have been in Lightfall on day one, its absence feels like a rather large gap in the offering. Speaking of gaps in the offering, I guess we should talk about playlist activities. If you'd have asked me 12 months ago, I would have said that the beating heart of Destiny was its playlists. Strikes, PvP, and Gambit. 12 months later, I would no longer say that. And I don't think anyone else would either, because the neglect that Bungie has shown the playlists demonstrates a shift not only towards seasonal content, but away from competitive experiences. Take, for example, the fact that we've only got one new strike with Lightfall. One. I mean, it's a really good strike, I love it, but one strike is a record low for the franchise. You might say, well, this is just another example of Bungie charging more and delivering less, but I don't think that's fair. We've already spoken about how the 3 new lost sectors are so chunky that they feel like mini strikes. Then there's the fact that each season now delivers a number of experiences that are analogous to strikes, seasonal battlegrounds or weekly missions that kind of do the same thing that strikes do. That's why Battlegrounds graduate to the Strike playlist when they roll out of a season, and to be honest, I think that's a good system. I still prefer a good Strike over a Battleground because there's something nice about the link between mission design, environment design, and narrative that only a Strike can truly nail, but I really do enjoy a whole bunch of the Battlegrounds from seasons past, and I'm glad they're sticking around for the future. Still, the Strike playlist itself is now a bit of an afterthought. It's where Battlegrounds go once we've already thrashed them for a full season. One new strike for Lightfall really tells you everything you need to know about how much Bungie are investing in this aspect of the game. It's a story that is very reflected on the PvP side of the game. We got one new strike in Lightfall. You want to know how many new PvP maps we got? 0. I mean, I've never been a hardcore PvP player in Destiny. I've only ever dabbled. But I can only imagine how hardcore PvP people feel looking at this number, because it's like disrespectful. Not even one map? Not one? Like, how can you possibly look the PvP community in the eye and say you care about that side of the game when you can't even give them one new map in a major expansion? The fact is though, and it's a reality that's dawned on all of us by degrees, but it's very clear that the more Destiny evolves toward the final shape, it is evolving away from being the sort of game that might attract and retain competitive-minded players. There was a time during Destiny 1 and certainly moments in Destiny 2 where that dream was still alive. You could imagine Destiny being the sort of game that might one day have a thriving PvP scene, supported by a regular flow of new maps, new modes, new compelling rewards, a true ranking system, etc. But I don't think anyone is holding out hope for any of that stuff now. We absolutely need to credit the return of Rift, the revisions made to Trials of Osiris and Iron Banner rewards economies, and various forms of experimentation taking place within Trials to try and spice it up. The bottom line is that when 99% of your new game content is pointed at PvE players, PvP players are going to look around and think, what the fuck am I doing here? And that's setting aside the endless balance and meta changes that are inherently irreconcilable in a PvE-focused game like Destiny. I've definitely seen this trend away from PvP myself. The people I play with used to be very invested in the PvP side of the game, and now basically none of them are. There are just so many other games that do PvP better, and so they play those instead. To be fair, there are very few PvE-focused live service games that do a better job than Destiny, other than your tentpole MMOs like WoW or Final Fantasy XIV. So Bungie are kind of just leaning into their strengths and leaning away from their weaknesses at this point. I think the reality is Destiny is just not a game that anyone who is serious about competitive experiences should invest their time in. Bungie really doesn't commit a lot to that part of the game anymore, so I think if you choose to commit to it, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. Speaking of disappointment, Gambit. Okay, so Gambit is just a joke at this point. It was earlier teased that we should expect some overhauling to commence at some point in the future. Feels like an expansion might have been the right time for that. Lo and behold, Lightfall hits, and the sorry state of Gambit is untouched. No new maps, no reprised maps, no changes to the core Gambit mechanics. I'm almost too bored to talk about Gambit at this point because we've all been saying the same thing for years. This game mode is broken, it's a meme at this point, and I think it should be vaulted. I think it genuinely results in negative player experiences and makes Destiny look like a shittier game than it really is. I'm really surprised that Bungie is okay to see it continue to exist in the way that it does. This sort of festering wound that won't heal. This is the thing that we're forced to do each week for Pinnacles, or the seasonal challenges, or seasonal weapons, or whatever, and yeah, it's just busted, and I really hope it gets taken out of the game, because I genuinely believe that there's no fixing it. The sandbox is simply too expansive now, the balance deltas are too wide. This worked back when our weapons, armor, mods, and subclasses were a fraction of the power that we have now, and I don't believe there's any version of Gambit that could work in the context of our current power and capabilities. So look, the core playlist's not in great shape, but funnily enough, I'm actually less concerned about that this year than I was in my Witch Queen review, largely because I've made peace with the reduced importance of each of these aspects of the game. I'm less concerned about there being only one new strike, because there's lots of other, very similar content I get each season that fills that gap for me. I'm less concerned about the lack of PvP content because I've well and truly accepted that Destiny is not a PvP game, nor is it likely to be again anytime in the future. And Gambit is, yeah man, Gambit's been dead to us all for a long time now. Is this kind of a resigned indifference? Partly, I suppose, but I guess I'm also just happy with the amount of content that Destiny delivers in a given season or year. I know everyone has a different take on this. I know many people feel shortchanged by what Destiny offers, but between new missions, strikes, seasonal activities, raids, dungeons, exotics to collect, etc., there is enough content coming regularly enough that I feel motivated to keep logging on to Destiny. That desire to log back in used to be driven in large part by the playlist activities. That's not the case anymore, as the playlists are far less central to the Destiny experience. For PvE players, I think we can live with that because we're being well serviced by other parts of the game. But for competitive players, it's getting harder and harder every year to justify a commitment to Destiny. As has been the case from year one and every year since, Destiny's raids are the pinnacle Destiny experience. I don't mean that in the power cap sense, I mean that there is no single piece of content across all of Destiny that better shows the power and potential of this franchise than the raids. The Root of Nightmares delivers many of the things that we've come to expect from a Destiny raid experience, but it is hard to take the raid seriously when its difficulty stands in stark contrast to not only other raids, but also the new difficulty model of activities like strikes, patrols, and lost sectors. Stepping into it, it is immediately overawing. Every raid without exception has brought a new visual motif to the table, from the rock face of the Vault of Glass to the chitin of the Dreadnought to the fluorescent lit halls of the Deepstone Crypt. The Root of Nightmares, or Ron as it's more affectionately known, is one of the most striking visual settings yet. A pyramid ship torn asunder, the light manifests as this bioluminescent creeping vinery, the Travelusi looking down upon us as we fight to defend it. The raid is comprised of 4 encounters. 2 of them are ad clear puzzles and 2 of them are boss DPS checks. I think it's quite fascinating to observe the sort of raid experience that Bungie aims to deliver with each raid, because it truly is so different from raid to raid. Other MMO raids are far more consistent with what they aim to offer. A predictable number of bosses with familiar mechanics remixed this way or that, as well as a difficulty curve that is generally consistent across each new raid. One WoW raid might be harder or easier than the other, but you get the sense that Blizzard are always aiming for a bullseye that doesn't move. It's just a matter of how far or close to the mark their final raid product ends up being. Destiny raids are not like that. A raid like Deepstone Crypt is super easy, very accessible, very welcoming to casual players. The perfect raid to roll through in either a pickup group or with clanmates while you shoot the shit. Garden of Salvation, or The Last Wish on the other hand, completely different story, chocked full of convoluted mechanics that make them very difficult to do unless your group is very coordinated. Within this difficulty spectrum sits the contest mode, a mode enabled for 24 hours only up until Lightfall, now 48 hours long, and this puts you 20 under power level to ensure that content is more challenging than a regular clear, but still significantly easier than something like a GM Nightfall. So Ron hits, contest mode enabled, and it's beaten in 2.5 hours by Clan Hard in the Paint. My clan and I beat it in about 4.5 hours. We were the 275th clan to do so. Over the weekend, some 45,000 teams would beat the raid, which is more teams than every other previous content mode combined. As teams rolled through and out of Ron, 2 sentiments emerged. Fun raid, easy raid. And it was on both counts. It was a fun raid in that it was very active with lots of stuff to shoot. It was very mobile, courtesy of these totally reliable and not at all fucking annoying catapults. It's got 2 bosses to fight. The final encounter looks remarkable if you can steal a second to take in the environment and the skybox. The music is fantastic. So yeah, it's fun. But it's also very, very easy. I won't lie. I was a little disappointed with how quickly contest mode was over. I had prepared a big bag of snacks and Red Bull ready to power me through a 12-hour plus session. To be done with it in just over 4 hours, that was a real bummer, to be honest with you. The best part about Ron to some will be its worst aspect to others, and that is, it's a very mechanically light raid. You really only need 2 people who know what they're doing. The rest of the time, the other 4 people can just kill ads. For real, I know, because I was one of the people on ad clear. I think the enduring appeal of Ron will be its accessibility and playability. Over time, Deepstone Crypt has actually become one of my favorite raids because of how well it hosts my clan as we roll through and just hang out. It's a hangout raid. You don't have to think or worry about anything, you just hang out and have fun. I like that, but I hope for more than that when it comes to a contest mode experience, and Ron absolutely did not deliver that. I didn't feel a true sense of satisfaction beating it, which I think is very important to maintain the prestige and excitement of the contest experience. The other dimension to this discussion is how awkward Ron looks when set against the increased difficulty model applied to other activities. It's way scarier to be in the seasonal battleground playlist than it is to be in contest mode. It is significantly harder to do an 1830 Nightfall than it is to do both the first and second encounters on contest mode. I just last night ran the raid again on normal and I was like, this is a problem. It was a genuine joke how easy it was, how low enemy health and damage output was, how mindless it all became. It's so weird to me that Bungie would re-baseline difficulty across like patrols, but then not apply that same difficulty to the raid. Being on patrol in Neomuna is way scarier than any encounter in Ron normal mode. That's ridiculous. Something has gone seriously wrong here. I think the contest mode experience has been cheapened, which really hits the motivation of hardcore PvE players, and I don't think the normal mode difficulty has been dialed in correctly, such that it trivializes a space that should by all accounts intimidate us when we step into it. Still, Ron offers a very inviting raid experience for those who might find themselves otherwise too intimidated to group up and have a crack at it. This is definitely one of the easiest raids across all of Destiny's history. So if you're someone that's been wanting to try raiding, this is the perfect raid to do so. For those looking for more of a challenge though, I guess we'll need to see what the master difficulty delivers, and after that, the final shape.
Let's just go out of there!
Finality takes shape.
It's creating the link!
At long last.
As I mentioned earlier, Lightfall is the penultimate chapter in the Light vs. Dark saga, and so I think it's fitting to end this review on the question, where does Destiny as a franchise sit right now, in this penultimate moment? I think we first need to assert that Destiny is in a good place. The last few years have solidified Destiny as a live service success story at a time when live services are dropping like flies. Half a dozen Destiny killers have come along trying to take a slice of the pie. Almost all of them have failed, often spectacularly so. Every new live service that flops is proof of not only how hard it is to survive, but how talented Bungie are to be able to thrive. It's little wonder that Sony snapped them up for nearly $4 billion as they pivot their business towards more live services. Secondly, I think we can say that narratively, Destiny is in a bit of a perilous position. The Lightfall campaign was such a disappointment that it really makes you wonder how Bungie are going to park this thing. I mean, we probably have 8 campaign missions left in the Light vs. Dark saga. Think about that. 8 missions and we are done. Obviously, we're going to see this story advance through seasonal content, but the sad thing about that is that many people won't be around to see that. The people who came in for a campaign experience were utterly confused and disappointed by it and then dipped. That is a bummer. It's also a bummer that if and when these narrative gaps are plugged by seasonal content, all of that seasonal content will be yeeted from the game when the final shape drops. It's a broader problem with the way Destiny handles its history and new player onboarding experience, and it's unlikely we'll see a resolution for that anytime soon. In terms of the core gameplay, Destiny is very well placed. It continues to be the best feeling shooter on the market today, and the difficulty changes have recentered the importance of gunplay. The new Strand subclass is a fantastic addition to the game, offering an entirely new way to play and potentially inviting in people for whom Destiny hasn't clicked in the past. Lightfall has delivered a number of sandbox and system changes that make Destiny easier to interface with. Simplified mods make buildcraft easier, though less flexible, and the loadout system allows people to switch between builds and playstyles in a way that's sure to make moment-to-moment playing of Destiny more diverse and more enjoyable. At the same time, there are some major gaps in some of Destiny's core systems and activities. The promised LFG system is delayed until later this year, and the commendation system is so bad that it's achieving the exact opposite of its stated design goals. Gambit is essentially a zombified corpse shambling along, unaware that it is long dead, and over the last 18 months, it's become clear that Destiny has little to offer any player serious about competitive PvP experiences. So with this sort of top-line assessment, we might ask, would we recommend Destiny to someone not already playing it? I don't know, man. I think it's tricky, to be honest. While Lightfall adds a few things that may convert someone into a Destiny fan, there are still some big barriers to entry. Until that new Light experience is improved, until Bungie figures out a way to better induct people into the Destiny universe, and until the in-game LFG tool is added, it's a bit hard to say to someone, now is the time to jump in. Plus, we're in year 9 of a planned 10-year saga. Why would you want to watch a TV series and start at episode 9? Obviously, it's not the same thing, but you get my meaning. We hear the term final shape, and we know it marks the end of this saga. Our imagination runs wild about what that could mean. Will we see a Destiny 3 after that? I don't know. But if you were to ask me right now, should I start playing Destiny? I'd probably say it's best to wait until the final shape or beyond to see what that brings. My secret hope was that Lightfall would have been so good as an expansion that I could have immediately said to you, yes, now is the time to play Destiny. You must be playing Destiny. Fortunately, Lightfall is not that. It's a good expansion, great in some areas, disappointing in others, but not one that makes Destiny essential to those not already under its spell. Those who already love what this is will be well serviced by it, and by the seasonal updates that follow it, but any sort of triumphalism we might have hoped for is really muted by how much of a letdown its story was, at a time when all of us were so deeply invested in and excited by this story. That's been the power of Bungie's storytelling these past few years. It brought us to the point where we could feel this bummed out about a bad story instead of just accepting it as we had earlier in the franchise's history. I really hope that Bungie are able to find a way to properly conclude this saga, because the disappointment we feel now for Lightfall's narrative would pale in comparison to the disappointment we'd feel at a whiffed final shape. Personally, I have faith that Bungie will be able to pull it off, but I guess we will have to wait and see. Okay, so that's Lightfall. Some good, some bad. You know what's all good though? These Lightfall themed peripherals, courtesy of SteelSeries. These guys put out a range last year for Witch Queen, and they're back at it again, this time with a synthwave purple style setup inspired by the expansion that IGN nearly scored 5 out of 10. This year's range is really impressive and includes some items that weren't included last year. We do see the return of the mouse mat, extremely large, giving you a ton of surface area for both your keyboard and mouse, with a nice RGB trim to boot, very fitting for the Lightfall theme. The mouse is based on the SteelSeries Aerox 5 wireless mouse, which is actually the mouse I use, so I really lucked out that they chose to give it a nice light Lightfall paint job. This is an ultra lightweight mouse, 40% lighter than your standard mouse, 9 programmable buttons, very comfortable and extremely responsive owing to its high DPI and its advanced switch technology. It's also tested for up to 80 million clicks durability, perfect for, Sura Chi farming. What about the headset? Well, this is based on the new Arctis 7 Plus wireless, one of the most versatile premium gaming headsets on the market. This thing works with PC and all consoles. It is super comfortable owing to its soft ear caps and elastic head strap. The sound quality is superb and it has up to 30 hours of battery life with a fast charge that lets you top up 3 hours worth of juice in as little as 15 minutes. For you last word controller sweats out there, I've got something for you too. Thanks to the SteelSeries partnership with Control Free, you can get Lightfall themed performance thumbsticks, giving you better grip and control with your analog sticks. Plus, there's a set that comes in a nice little traveler themed carry case thing. Want to know what's inside the traveler? Well, now you do. Control Freak thumbsticks. Finally, some of this stuff comes with a unique emblem or emote. This is the emblem I'm rocking right now. It's called Luminescent Precision, and this is the emote. It's called Viral Celebration. And yeah, I have not had it unequipped ever since I got it. This stuff only dropped in the last week or so, and last year's lineup actually sold out when I did this shout out attached to my Witch Queen review. So if you want to get this stuff, then you better get in quick. Plus, it's a limited range, so while they may come back in stock once or twice, they definitely won't be back after that. Here comes the best part. If you want to grab any and all this stuff, you can use offer code SKILLUP at checkout, and you'll get 12% off your purchase. No catch, no strings attached, just a straight up 12% off when you use offer code SKILLUP. This is top shelf kit, it's got a sexy Lightfall paint job, and it's 12% off. That is a good deal. I hope you can nab some of this stuff for yourself before it sells out. Thank you SteelSeries for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.